do we want to get into the Knicks? Do you want to?
Sure. Sure.
I mean, so
I've been a Knicks fan for a long time.
Okay, so how old are you?
I was born in '86. So my first taste, 7 years old, was that was like my first memory is us losing in the finals.
Right.
I loved Starks.
You lose the finals again to the Rockets, right?
Yeah. So
you're a 7-year-old. You're watching the low speed of O.J. Chase in the right hand corner of the screen, and the Knicks Rockets in Madison Square Garden and the full screen.
At least O.J. gave us hope with that chase. You know what I mean? At least he didn't brick 18 shots or 16, 2 for 18 Starks.
John Starks. Man.
I love Starks. That hurt. As a kid, he's every kid's favorite player because he's a gunslinger. Every kid loves a guy who's just kind of streaky.
Yeah, with no conscience.
No conscience.
At all.
I loved him.
But that was so great about him. And Starks he came out of nowhere.
And he was 6'3", guarding Jordan and Reggie and all the two guards.
Let me tell you, too, just since you were 7 years old, I mean, I'm 50, so I'm a little bit older than you. And so wow, I graduated high school when this man was born. But all that said, I'm trying to do the math in my head. But all that said, you're just Knicks fans waiting for somebody like Ewing. And then waiting for Ewing to be paired with anybody that could take the pressure off of him. And it was supposed to be Bernard King, but Bernard King blew his knee out just as Ewing was being drafted, which is why they were drafted so high. They were able to draft so high. That and maybe a frozen envelope in the David Stern Tureen. But by the way, great fantasy team name, David Stern's Tureen. That Starks was that guy. He finally became, like, obviously pairing Oakley with him was one thing as an enforcer, but you needed someone to put points on the board and create an outside game that could take the pressure off of Ewing, and Starks was that guy.
But how many teams won, like, with a guy at Starks' level as a second option? It's, right, like, very few.
Well, you got to be honest with you. Almost the Cavs did with J.R. Smith, I'm
with
trying to compare you with LeBron. Yeah,
they had Kevin Love and Kyrie though.
No, I guess that's the other they wanted, or I guess they could come close. I'm trying to make some sort of comparison.
The Rockets that year, I guess, are the comparison because they had maybe like a rookie Sam Cassell and Robert Horry and
maybe
Vernon Maxwell. They didn't really have a guy who was. I feel like every other team had. Bird had a couple guys. Magic had a couple guys. Jordan had Pippen. I feel like
I mean, the Knicks again had Oakley, which is another reason why I've swore off the Knicks because of the way Oakley got treated. I
got a crazy Oakley story.
Please, you have the floor.
Well, first off, I was at the game.
You were at the game.
I was at the game with my friend Michelle Wolf, who's a comic, and she's adopted the Knicks. I feel like partly out of our friendship. My other friend Joe Mackey, they're both from Pennsylvania, so they've adopted the Knicks because they moved to New York, and we're good friends. So we're at the game. We see it going down. And it's insane. It's humiliating.
It's insane.
And I worked for the Garden. I had a show on MSG. So I had a show on that network. They were like, we're going to make a comedy show. I don't know if you know this. Not the best home for comedy. The MSG network.
Well, intended comedy.
No,
it's not unintended comedy. Man, it's a treasure trove there,
They insulted me nonstop. And it was tough because I'm a diehard Knicks fan. It's insane for me to just be like, oh, I get to interview Starks and Evander Holyfield and anyone who comes on the show. This is so cool to me.
Right.
A kid who grew up loving the Garden. So it was tough. And then Oakley, I see him at the Big Three. He's at the Big Three tournament, Ice Cube's thing, and I'm covering it because I was like, wow, I could interview like 20 NBA players. I get to interview Dr. J, Iverson, all these great people.
For MSG.
Yeah. It never made the show. I got all this footage and they're like, we can't. This is a great example of MSG. So I interview Walt Frazier, who's the coolest. Who's cooler than Walt Frazier?
Nobody.
And I'm a big fan. So I said, I'm asking questions to me that are interesting. Like, you used to you were roommates with Phil Jackson on the road. That's got to be pretty weird when you see players living these luxurious lifestyles. You have a roommate. Like, that must make the bond that much more intense. And then they cut it down to just ask about his commentating. I'm like, this guy lived the most incredible life, and we're just going to ask him about broadcasting?
Right.
And so the interview's condensed to me, like, use a lot of big words. That's the interview.
That's it?
That's basically it, So,
wow.
So I get to Oak at the Big Three, and he sees the MSG mic in my hand, and he smacks it out of my hand. Do you know how painful that is for a kid who, like, I was like, you were my guy. And I can't, like, I couldn't even, so I just said, hey man, I'm a New York kid. I'm a comic. Like, I don't know what to tell you. And he kind of softened a little when he saw that it hurt me, And we talked, but he wasn't warm. And then the show ended up going off the air. And I ended up doing this thing for Bleacher Report, and it was an infomercial, and it was just me and Oakley.
Okay.
Right? So it's me and Oak, and it was supposed to like cut away to Michael Rappaport and Ron Artest and all these people. So the infomercial, it's called Oaks. It was a big production. It's called Oaks New York Deli, and it's premium New York beef.
Right.
And then he comes out, and I'm
Premium
like an
New York
infomercial guy.
beef.
And then I'm doing the infomercial, and he comes in, he goes, with no MSG, you know? It was a really funny sketch. And Oak, like there's a part where Oak smacks the deli meat out of a kid's hands. He's like,
Right.
no easy buckets, you know, dumb stuff like
Sure,
that. But
right.
out of Oak's mouth, it's hilarious. And they just ended up not airing it because they didn't want the beef with
But Dolan,
MSG.
it's
Yeah.
amazing, man.